Hello, I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode of The Dairy Edge, researcher Beth Dooley gives tips and advice on how to create an employment contract for employees on dairy farms. And first, Beth gives an insight into her background prior to research, including growing up on a tillage farm in America, studying law, and her experience of working with farm succession and discussion groups in other countries.
As you can probably hear from the accent, I'm originally from Iowa in the United States. I come from a tillage farm, and by Iowa standards, it's a small farm. It's 320 tillable acres. And farming is definitely part of my background, but I ended up going to American law school, which we do postgraduate. So I ended up specializing in agricultural and food law, and took the Iowa bar, so I'm certified as an attorney. But I really didn't have any interest in private practice. I ended up going over to Scotland and specializing in global environment and climate change law, because I was really interested in this sort of the intersection of environmental and particularly climate change policy that was coming down the pike, how that impacted farmers on the ground or potentially would impact farmers on the ground. And then from there, I ended up moving to Berlin, and I worked in an environmental policy think tank on agricultural and environmental sort of policy, how it again impacted producers on the ground throughout the member states. Particularly under the Common Agricultural Policy. So after that, I moved back to the States for about a year and a half and worked on farm succession planning with different farm families, and also did farmer creditor mediations, and that would be between agricultural lenders and farmers. And then I moved back over to the UK, and I began a PhD in rural sociology. So basically that was around how people learn from each other, particularly in the context of farmer discussion groups, and sort of what makes those particularly good environments in terms of sharing knowledge and sort of challenging each other around different practices and ideas in terms of how different farming operations might be run. And then I, in January, moved over here and joined Teagasc.
I guess that, really, really interesting insight, Beth, into, I guess, what you've done in the past, a really unique and diverse skill set to add to the team at Teagasc Moor Park. And I suppose looking to what you started in January, working on the People in Dairy programme, and I guess tackling the labour challenge that exists within the Irish dairy industry. I guess, starting out, you're here now roughly 6 months. Can you give us some insight into your early observations of the dairy industry here in Ireland?
Absolutely. So I would say, with regards to some of the challenges that are being faced, those would be somewhat similar to other contexts, but every farming context is unique. And so within the Irish context, the average farmer is about 54 years old. So particularly they might be at a stage where they're moving towards maybe requiring additional help on farm, or looking to potentially succession to the next generation, or if there's nobody at the next generation who's looking to want to go into farming, then, or if they're maybe too young, they might be considering employing labor, or exploring the possibility of a joint venture or a collaborative venture. And so this creates huge opportunities, but also there are challenges around, having a steady stream or a sufficient availability of the right people who are trained young farmers and to a certain standard. So also we're all aware of the expansion within the industry that has come about due to the removal of milk quotas. So there's been herd expansion, and this has been quite considerable in some cases. So regardless of how efficient farmers have made their operations on their farm, there's always more work that can be done. And there's particularly during like busy periods, particularly around calving, there might be additional need for help. So yeah, those are some of the issues that have come to the fore.
So all of that rings strong, Beth, in terms of what you're saying, all very logical. Interesting when you talk about the average age of farmers being 54. I guess, from a dairy perspective, that is younger than the national average if we look across all industries. And of course, we are aware of a lot of young people in dairy farming. So, while the age is aging in at 54, there is a good range. I guess from what you can see, and particularly your expertise from dealing with discussion groups in the UK and your brief experience here in Ireland, for farms that are employing labour, can you give us some ideas of best practice that you see to ensure that there's a good relationship between employers and employees, and also then that work is done to a high standard on farms?
Absolutely. So you'd be looking at things like processes and practices on farm being streamlined and continuously assessed for improvement. So you'd be looking at, trying to get as good a grazing as possible, standard operating procedures around milking routines and rotas, building infrastructure and tidy facilities. And this, to promote labor efficiency, but also I cannot stress enough the importance of good communication. Absolutely key. So in all the different countries and farming contexts where I've worked, communication can make or break employment relationships, as well as farm family dynamics and succession processes. So this will be something that the People in Dairy program will be aiming to develop ongoing trainings and resources around, because developing communication skills is an ongoing process. It's not just a personality trait like, oh, I'm a good communicator or I'm not. Or once you've learned it, you never need to upskill or improve. We can all actively reflect and think about how we can better communicate our expectations, check for understanding, ask questions for clarification, and ask for feedback on whether things could be done differently, rather than, potentially muddle through tasks on assumptions or let unsatisfactory performance fester and turn into potentially a toxic issue when it, didn't need to escalate to that level.
I think that's an interesting point. Good communication, it isn't something that you either have or you haven't. You can learn it. And your point there, we need to continue to work on that skill. I guess, every day is a school day, and, an important point that you make there on that. So to really take advantage of your expertise, Beth, looking to the HR of farming. So you mentioned there, grassland management, set out, I guess, the structure, the rules for the farm, for the milking process and SOP. These things are quite clear cut on farms. You also mentioned that farms are in the situation now, due to expansion or due to the age profile of farmers, that additional help is becoming more of a thing that is required on farms. So we need staff. If we reflect back prior to the removal of milk quotas, a lot of farmers would have done a lot of the work themselves. So they're moving to a space where they now need to employ people, be it on a part-time and seasonal basis or full-time. So to get some insight from you, it's probably an area that we're weak in, and that we really need to focus on, I suppose, maybe put ourselves in that uncomfortable position of exposing our weaknesses and learning. What is important for employers, from the employee perspective, to ensure that they're doing everything right from a HR perspective?
Sure. So I guess, just coming out of Farm Safety Week, so there's definitely a need for a safe workplace where, any issues such as breakages to machinery, those are rectified without delay. But also that the people carrying out the tasks, whether that be employees or employers, are not physically and mentally burnt out, because exhaustion and distraction can definitely lead to potentially cutting corners, and that's maybe where accidents might happen. In terms of human resource management practices, employees, they really should be paid regularly, and whether that be weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, and that making sure that the employee knows when they will be paid, and when the money is coming in. It's really only a small thing, but it's important, and it can be done potentially quite easily through an automated process, setting that up with your bank. Also, from a legal standpoint, there needs to be an employment contract on a written employment contract. And, employees' hours recorded. There needs to be pay slips issued. And these are mandatory with the WRC. And so these are really non-negotiable as part of employing labor on dairy farm businesses.
The pay thing is an interesting one you mentioned, Beth, because as you say, it can be automated, that it's not even a task that a farmer needs to consider. But, I have heard in the past, employees don't know when the paycheck is coming, and they know it will come, but they're just not sure when it's going to land in their account. And that can create a little bit of conflict that the farmer mightn't necessarily be aware of. But, it can lead to problems down the line where there's, a breakdown of, I suppose, employment on farms. You mentioned the safety as well. And it's funny it comes up in a conversation like this, because I think it's relevant across the board. Let's talk about the written contract, Beth. I suppose some farmers are listening in today. They have employees and they don't necessarily have a contract for them. What is the starting point, as you see it, to create that contract?
Yeah, so there are rules around what needs to be included, and I would point people towards an excellent resource on the Teagasc website. And Aisling Meehan, who is a solicitor here in Ireland, has put together a PowerPoint presentation that really lays out the essential employment law requirements that need to be met by farmers. And there's again, excellent language in there, sample language in there that could be included within employment contracts, and sort of, it could give you ideas in terms of how to phrase things. But really, some of the essential elements of an employment law contract it's fairly straightforward in terms of laying out the terms and conditions. So what are the expectations around the job, and what are the roles and responsibilities of both the employer and the employee? You're just trying to clarify the relationship here. So, full name and address of both the employer and then the name of the employee. And I will do in a little asterisk here that if you have a company, if your farm business is incorporated or something, that formal name needs to be on the contract. The place of work, or a statement that the employee will be required to work at various places. There needs to be a job title, and what the nature of the work will entail. So what is that person going to be expected to do? This doesn't have to be 100% every single thing that they might do, but sort of generally giving a broad overview of the different types of work that they would be carrying out. What date the employment commenced? I mean, that's fairly straightforward in terms of having a record of when they started. Whether or not the contract is temporary or fixed, and if it is fixed, then on which date the contract expires, and the rate of pay, whether they would be paid weekly, fortnightly, or monthly. What are the terms and conditions relating to the hours of work? So this would also indicate overtime. Is there paid leave that's included? What if there's if they become incapacitated? Is there anything around pensions or pension schemes, if that's applicable? So also, and this would be pretty standard again in employment contracts, not just within the farming industry, but what's the period of notice that the employee is entitled to receive, or that they must give if there's going to be a termination of the employment relationship, as well as then rest periods and breaks. So those are some of the elements. And again, I would definitely refer people to that PowerPoint, because it's an incredibly insightful resource to get you started.
Yeah, and just, I suppose, to reiterate some of that, the full name and address of both the employee and the employer, the place of work identified, the job title and nature of work, the commencement date, the type of contract, be it temporary or fixed, looking at the rate of pay and terms and conditions around pay, and then that notice period for both the employer and employee. I would say that a lot of people are going to rewind and re-listen to your tips there, Beth. But I would say that, to me, listening to that and thinking about employer-employee relationships within a farm context, this is providing a lot of, I suppose, support and protection for both parties. You know, if there is an issue arising, that this is something to simply fall back on to clarify exactly where both parties stand. Interestingly, Tom Lawton and Marion Beecher would have done a little bit of research and further investigation on dairy farms through a survey. Could you give us some insight into the findings that they would have seen in that survey? Absolutely.
So there have been multiple studies that have shown that recruiting and managing people, those are challenges that dairy farmers face both here in Ireland and abroad, and that human resource management practices can help make farms more attractive and retain employees. So that survey of over 300 dairy farmers was exploring the prevalence of human resource management practices on farms that had between 1, 2, or 3 or more employees. So they were sort of divided out into those different categories in terms of the data that came back. And in addition to findings around the increasing amounts of time off for the farmers as they employed more people, which has traditionally been a struggle for farmers to get sufficient breaks from work. Also, the level of legal compliance in terms of formal employment contracts and more diverse kinds of human resource management practices also increased between farms that employed more staff. So, to put it another way, if farms are only employing one person, let's say, they might take more of an informal approach toward the employment agreement, so not meeting the written contract requirement, or issuing pay slips, collecting employees' details, having a formal job or position description, or recording employees' time. Although that last one, there was a slightly higher compliance for farms that employed one person with recording employees' time. And also, there were significant differences between farms with 1 to 3 or more employees in terms of having rosters or regular staff meetings, as well as offering an induction and probationary period for new employees. So one of the things that also was identified is that training and opportunities for personal development and career development, according to what each employee's goals are, and where they'd like to get to within their future career, those have been shown to be massively influential in people feeling invested in their jobs and feeling valued by their employer. So formal CPD trainings, as well as informal events, workshops, learning opportunities, and whatnot, are an important and potentially underutilized way that farm teams could improve their relationship and buy-in to the farm's goals and objectives. So
some really, really interesting stuff there from that research, Beth. And I suppose just to fall back on a few points there. So we have gotten into detail about the contract, and one of the things that you said is it's a non-negotiable from a work relations perspective, but the payslip. And what you would see is a lot of people are doing the payslip through the accountant. And the reality is, like, there's an automated payslip there, and it's just to send it out to the staff member. And that's just something that sprung to mind when you were when you mentioned that. The recording of time, is that something that should fall on the employer or the employee as a task that needs to be done? Where do you see that responsibility lying?
Well, from a liability standpoint or compliance standpoint, that really would fall with the employer. And if there's an agreement between them that the employee would be involved in that process and that they would, keep track of their hours, and then, they'd have some type of, okay, every Friday we, come to put our heads together and compare hours, or you give me what you have recorded or whatnot to formally put it into some type of recording spreadsheet or program, then that's something that could be worked out. But I I think really ultimately that would probably fall back on the employer as a responsibility that they would need to take care of.
And the final point then on that, Beth, you mentioned, personal development and investing in staff members, both formally and informally. And that's something that is of interest to a lot of staff members. And also it's definitely of benefit to farms, because I guess previous research that I would have seen demonstrates that increasing levels of education leads to increased levels of efficiency, performance on farms, and also profit. Finally, Beth, you were involved in running a competition over the next couple of weeks, the hashtag This Is Dairying competition. And a lot of people who are listening in today will reflect on this competition is similar to what was run ahead of the Moore Park Open Day in 2019. So a similar competition, and I guess an opportunity for farmers to really showcase what they love about what they're doing day to day. But I mean, let's take the opportunity, Beth, to discuss it. Can you tell us exactly what you're looking for this competition, and maybe how people can enter, and what is the ultimate prize at the end of the competition?
Absolutely. So yeah, in running the This Is Dairying competition again, what we're really hoping to do is showcase pride within Irish dairying and all the great things that people who work in the industry get to experience all the time, and that other people might not see if we don't sort of shout about how great the industry is. So some of the competition entries from 2019 are absolutely gorgeous photos around sort of the next generation and showcasing potentially their role on the farm right now, or that they're going to be the future of the farm moving forward. There were amazing landscape shots, sort of these beautiful vistas that people who get to work out in nature every day get to see that other people might take for granted. And so those types of photos are sort of what we're hoping that people will send through. At some people who entered the competition last time might remember that you just need to post it on your social media with the hashtag. It's a bit different this time because we're trying to streamline it through a website where you can very easily just snap a photo, upload it into the website, and just give a brief description what the photo showcases about what you love about Irish dairying. And so that website is www.teagasc.ie/thisisdairying. And so again, it's very easy. Just go to that website, and it will sort of streamline the whole process in terms of submitting your entry. And we're really excited. The prize for the first place photo that's going to be chosen is €500. Actually, it's in all for one vouchers, or
one for all.
One for all. Sorry, I'm getting used to your voucher scheme here. Sorry. And then second place would be €250. Third place would be €150, and then we're actually having 7 because it would be a top 10 finalists. That those top 3 will be chosen from. So the 7 additional finalists will receive a €50 one for all for one.
One for all.
One for all voucher.
That is great, Beth. And as you say, a lot of what you saw in the last competition back in 2019 was landscape of dairy farming, and particularly fun and of interest is the young recruits, the future farmers that you would have seen, and as you say, showcasing pride in the industry. For people who want to enter, just I suppose a reminder, it's the This Is Dairying on the Teagasc website. So I guess Beth, you've spelt out the address. We'll link that to the show notes, but I guess also for people like myself, it might be as easy to Google Teagasc This Is Dairy, and it'll bring you straight to the page. A simple upload, and €500 up for grabs for the top prize. Thank you, Beth.
You're very welcome. Thanks.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Beth Dooley for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.